Let's bring in Brian Dunseth. He covers Real Salt Lake. He knows the ins and outs of that team and also MLS things as well. He's plugged into American soccer. Dunny, how are you, sir?
I'm good, man. Good. Everything good?
Yeah. We're just getting ready for Saturday. I know you're pretty excited as well, being one of the teams, or the team that you cover. Real Salt Lake is one of the teams playing in MLS Cup. Before we get to that, though, we learned best 11 for MLS this year. Any surprises for you, or was all your choices that you made publicly all right on the mark?
Yeah, I think I came in 7 for 11. So I was a little bit off. I did not have Jose Gonçalves coming anywhere near the best 11, much less the Defender of the Year. I only saw him once. I think he's a victim of kind of a few teams in this league that don't get enough national attention, and I only judged him based on the one game that I saw against Real Salt Lake, and he kind of got turned inside out a few times. So I was surprised by that one. To be honest with you, I was a little bit surprised. I guess you can't really go wrong at this point, right, with best 11. I think it's all debatable after the fact when we're talking about the snubs. But I thought there were a few players left off. I thought Javier Morales had a great year this year. I know it's been a toss-up between he and Diego Valeri, and Diego Valeri, I think, is a shoo-in for Newcomer of the Year. But I was also a bit surprised that Palma Duca wasn't in the best 11 for defenders. I just thought he came in, he really solidified that back line. He complemented Donovan Ricketts very, very well. And then outside that, I was a little surprised Landon Donovan was left off, because I thought, regardless of how you feel about Landon and how you feel about kind of his extended offseason, I thought he was vital to the success of not only the LA Galaxy, but also of Robbie Keane. So you really can't go wrong with best 11. I think the only thing we all have arguments are on the media side is how did so-and-so insert name here get left off?
Yeah, I agree. And, to your point about Codd, do you think that he might have been hurt by the fact that there were already 3 Timbers on the best 11?
Yeah, absolutely. I think also Darlington Nagbe's name should be in the conversation. I thought he was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal this year. I'll always sound like a bit of a homer because I guess I'm kind of represent one of the voices of Real Salt Lake. But I was shocked, really, really shocked, not to see a single RSL player. I said this earlier on our show and on Frame that I think sometimes the bar has been set so high in terms of consistency. I mean, 5 years of 15-plus wins, over 50 points. I think sometimes, and again, it's arguable, but I think sometimes as fans, we kind of overlook how well some of the teams are playing, or some of the players are playing over the course of the season, just because we're so used to them performing at such a high level.
Yeah.
And you can go around the league and you can identify certain teams that have had good years. And make arguments. But I think not seeing a single RSL player in the starting 11, the best 11, especially with the fact that they traded away 3 All-Stars and a solid contributor and a guy like Johnny Steele. I thought that was a little bit surprising. And outside of that, the lack of a New York Red Bulls presence outside of Tim Cahill.
Let me ask you this. I do have a point to your point, but when is this vote due in?
Like, vote for best 11?
Yeah, is it pre-playoff?
Yeah, I think I voted right before the playoffs.
Okay, so
we're basing it on MLS regular season standard.
And that's the problem is, I'm not saying it's a problem. It's for the regular season, so it would stand to reason that should be in before then. But, and this is my next question, which you touched on in your last answer and also in other arenas, is that, RSL, as you said, were too deep or too good for so long that people have begun to take them for granted. And you're seeing that people took them for granted at their own risk, as after the best 11 votes are due in, you see RSL make this run to MLS Cup.
No, I agree with you. I think, it's. I actually had this conversation today. It's funny. I've always been disappointed with the fact that statistics weren't kept for players in the postseason. I think, in my opinion, it's a travesty that players that work so hard and play so well throughout the course of the season aren't rewarded at the end of the day with their stats being counted towards their quote-unquote career statistics in Major League Soccer. Because I think you do a disservice to the big game Charlies, the guys that really do show up in the playoffs when it really matters. Because I think it's very easy throughout the course of the season to statistically have a good year. But when teams tighten up, and I'll use an example, and I use it loosely, and it's not to take a shot at him, but Jack McInerney is a perfect example. The kid's lights out. He's just on fire for the first half of the season. Once you get to the All-Star break, I think that's when teams start slowing down offensively. It's when teams defensively start working on an identity, a structure, a formation of how to defend. And then once you get down to those final weeks of the playoff or into the playoffs, that final stretch is you start seeing, 0-0 results, 1-0 results, 2-1 results. You don't see those 5-3 games anymore. So the first half of the season is all about scoring goals. The second half of the season is all about defending as a core group, as a unit, and working on tactical shape. And that's why my argument's always been for MLS to focus on counting the statistics in the postseason, because I think that's when the most important statistics happen. That's guys showing up in big games when the defense is focused on you and focused on shutting you down. I think those stats are even more important.
Let's start turning our attention to Saturday's match at Sporting Park. It'll be RSL versus Sporting Kansas City. First off, Dunny, and I don't know how in the loop you are on Ticketgate, but could you give us a brief overview on what happened and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was in California. I finally got my first pseudo vacation. I did Europa League back-to-back games in L.A. On Thanksgiving morning. So I was trying my best to distance myself from all things soccer while at the same time focusing on that and trying to get my voice back after losing it in Portland. But from what I understand and how it's kind of been reported is in some way, shape, or form, a certain code was leaked that was meant for Sporting Kansas City fans. And that code was to allow fans to purchase tickets to the final via Ticketmaster. With this day and age, with technology, with social media, with the amount of sharing that goes amongst what I think is the most proactive supporter group in sports in the United States, because we as soccer fans don't get force-fed our sports the same way football, basketball, baseball do. We have to be socially active, being more aggressive. The information went public. It was retweeted through, every single avenue possible, and tickets were purchased. After tickets were purchased, confirmation was given. Fans, Real Salt Lake, who thought they had ticket in hand, ended up buying flights, ended up buying hotels, and some ended up shelling over $2,000 out after the fact of buying tickets.
Because in their mind, they already had their tickets.
The confirmation was in place, absolutely. And a couple of buddies that I know here in Salt Lake that received email confirmations that their purchase has gone through, both on Ticketmaster's side and through their credit card company. So once Ticketmaster and Sporting Kansas City and Real Salt Lake, after it all became public that this happened, I don't know. I'm trying to navigate this the right way without pointing fingers, but between the three, somehow it was decided that Ticketgate would be would be the hashtag of choice for the next couple of days, and all those tickets, the order would be rescinded. It would take 5 to 7 days for money to be put back to the accounts of those who had purchased the said tickets, and all those purchases would be voided. So now, basically, what I've been telling fans that I know the secondary market sucks, but if you can find StubHub or if you can find tickets, on that secondary market, that's probably your best bet. But it's a terrible situation all the way around. It's something. If this was in Salt Lake, it would be a similar situation for Sporting Kansas City fans in terms of trying to get tickets in limited availability. Not ideal by any means, but then again, I think it puts more of an onus on the teams and the players trying to make sure that they secure home field advantage for the MLS Cup final, should they have that opportunity.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And, I don't want to point fingers either. For me as an outsider, it feels more of, rather than a situation of malice on anyone's part, MLS or Sporting Kansas City, it seems more of a naivete to think to themselves, like you said, in this day and age, with the way things work, that you would be able to I don't want to say sneak through, but put something out online and only people in Kansas City have any knowledge of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But again, to build on that point, I think we are in the most progressive, technologically driven situation that we've ever been in, and I think it's, while at times there are going to be situations like this, and kind of quote unquote our worst enemy. I think it's our best friend in terms of driving the game and creating fan culture and rivalry. And again, to put a feather in the cap of MLS and MLSsoccer.com and what Chris Slosser and Greg Lawless and company are trying to do over there, I think it creates this unique dynamic where it continues to evolve, and hopefully lessons learned going forward. Yeah. That potentially we can take advantage of situations, but. Listen, at the end of the day, at some level, depending on what side you're sitting on, it's a great problem to have that we're talking about this. I mean, I've been a part of this league since 1997, and I can tell you firsthand, it was never like this. It was never like this in the good old days.
But I mean, this is the good and the bad about having MLS Cup at a venue of one of the teams playing. But let me ask you this question in this way to kind of sidestep any issues. Would a situation where it would be a 50-50 situation for both clubs, even the visiting club, would that rectify that, or would that kind of negate the whole we've got a home field advantage situation in the first place?
I think it could, but I also remember, 2010 in Toronto? And it was a delayed kickoff. I want to say it was around 8 or 9 o'clock on East Coast time. Yeah. When it kicked in Toronto, and I was freezing to death. I remember sitting next to Bobby Ryan, and we were just chugging beers trying to stay warm. We were looking for the nearest St. Bernard and a collar full of whiskey. And it's after being in LA the last couple of years, and I think it builds something special. It builds another importance, and I think we're always, as fans and media, just slagging MLS off for not being a promotion relegation and not being the whole kind of purist idea of how it is around the world, every other place. It's an interesting dynamic, and I think it puts more of a focus on, not skating through the summer months and not, just backing off when, that intensity that we're always talking about, comparing it to Premier League or La Liga or Serie A or Bundesliga or, your league of choice. We're always saying how important those games are. Maybe this puts more of an importance on there and puts more of an importance on, trophies as opposed to friendlies.
The Jason Christ to NYCFC rumors heated up over the last few days. The way I look at it is this is another step as far as the media is concerned, or at least for the players, that, the league is big time now. This is what the players in every other major sports, these kind of narratives pop up when you have 2 weeks to come up with storylines for games. You see it all the time in Super Bowls, but for the players and for Jason Christ, how much of a distraction is this for guys who aren't used to having to deal with this kind of pressure going into an MLS Cup and then this kind of media scrutiny going into a big match like this?
It's funny. I actually called Brian Strauss immediately after I saw that tweet. I consider him a good friend of mine. I was like, oh, thanks. You just swatted the hornet's nest in Salt Lake City. Congratulations. And he honestly didn't think it was going to be that big of a story. It was, from his perspective, it was the same person who had confirmed Jason's trip to Manchester City. in the middle of the summer. And credit to Jason. For Brian's first tweet to cause so much havoc is expected, but I don't think people gave Brian enough credit, because his second tweet was something along the lines of, what is this? What does this say? Here's this source claiming this deal's almost 100% done, yet Jason has not only deflected it publicly, but he has turned this team into this juggernaut. Tighten the screws, and his focus was only Real Salt Lake. I think this only benefits, this story only benefits, one person, and that's the source who intended to leak it. And I think that intention was nothing more than to make New York FC relevant during the MLS Cup, the week leading into the MLS Cup final. I think from Jason's perspective, whatever he decides to do, he deserves the opportunity. He's been nothing but a consummate professional. He's an incredible human being. He's the type of guy that you want to be friends with, that you want to play for, that you want to go into battle with. And regardless of what he chooses after that final whistle this weekend, I've got nothing but respect for him. I think the players recognize it. It's a non-conversation inside the RSL locker room. It's more of a conversation for the fans and for the media. And at the end of the day, it's a situation where I think if all parties were honest, from RSL's side, from Jason's side, from anyone involved, from an agent side, this is something that should have gotten taken care of 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. There's no way a guy like Jason Kreis should be in the final 2 years of his contract without seeing a new contract presented. Now, there's a lot of dynamics between the ownership change of Dave Checketts and Deloy Hansen that lead into this situation. Maybe the first time for Deloy of dealing with a sports management situation where he's got a coach in the last year of his contract. Whatever finger we decide to point at or use to point at the end of the day, I think it would be a huge, huge loss for RSL if Jason Kreis was no longer the head coach. But that's something that, Jason's been adamant about. He's been public out here saying he's going to take 3 days to walk away after the game and just go into his bunker and sort out what his life, what that next step is for he and his family and professionally. And I believe Jason when he says that he hasn't come to a decision, and whatever that source said was incorrect. But I will say that if I was Jason Kreis, which I'm not, if I was even leaning towards a situation like that, I would have some massive, massive concerns that someone would intend to leak something like that and cause that much harm to the preparation of what he's trying to do with no other risk than putting a feather in his own cap. That would absolutely concern me.
Good point. Very good point. Let's talk about the matchup itself. I don't want to get all Euro on you, but this does feel like, to me as an MLS fan, a dream matchup. And I say that because two, I don't want to say, well, I'm going to say it, smaller market teams, not in the glamour cities. So, I mean, from a league standpoint, I could see why you'd want a New York, an LA, a Seattle. But for me, I see two passionate fan bases, two well-run organizations doing battle for an MLS Cup, and two clubs that play a very entertaining brand of soccer. And to me, that's why it feels like the dream matchup. Portland would have been great as well, but these two are really, really good.
Yeah, I think they're best friends and mortal enemies all wrapped in one. Aesthetically, they play a very similar style. Defensively, they're unapologetic for the way they play. Not afraid to tackle, get stuck in, to physically dominate their opponents. Offensively, I think both of them really apply the same philosophy, and that's to basically strangle their opponents through possession. While structurally and from a formation standpoint, they look a little bit different, I think the idea and the philosophy is still the same. Real Salt Lake is known for their diamond formation and the 4-4-2 structure. Sporting Kansas City is the 4-3-3. They like to defend high. They like to recover the ball quickly. They like to basically limit the amount of space that they have to attack by already being in the offensive half of the field when they recover the ball. And again, it's two head coaches that have played Major League Soccer. I think that's probably the most prideful part is their both players have kind of seen the highlight of their career in the league and then transitioned into taking over and using that philosophy, that experience to find success. Both teams with designated players, but yet at the same time they focus on the development of young American players. And I agree with you. I think it's going to be demolition derby for 15 minutes, and it's going to settle in, and it's going to be really about Sporting Kansas City utilizing their strength through wide play and overlapping runs and thumping balls into the box. And for Real Salt Lake, the idea is not to get caught up in that and really utilize the possession and the diamond and overloading the midfield and kind of the typical possession style oriented attack that RSL's used to dictating over the course of the 90 minutes.
And I think at this point in the development of the league, at least from a media or a rating standpoint, market size isn't important. It's more important to put on a good show in your marquee matchup or your last game of the season for the league.
Yeah, I've made this argument, to Real Salt Lake fans over and over and over. It's one thing to aesthetically be one of the best looking teams in the league with the ball at your feet and the chances created. It's another thing to redefine yourself as a fan base and to create an atmosphere outside of those white lines and in the seats. And I give credit to Rob Heineman and Peter Vermeesen for the team and how active they've been in and around the city of Kansas City. What they've done is nothing short of phenomenal. Sporting Kansas City has set the bar in terms of redefining an organization, and I think it actually, what they've done has made Chivas USA look that much more embarrassing.
Yeah,
it's been incredible what the fans have done, the whole atmosphere, the blue hell. I mean, everything from a digital aspect to an in-stadium experience. I love being a part of the broadcast going there. I love being a part of the NBC Sports broadcast where I'm in between the benches and I can feel the intensity on the field and I can smell the grass and I can see guys clattering into each other. It is incredible. And I think it's the standard that's been set for MLS. And it's, I think, something that, with the exception of Seattle and Portland, I think those two teams in Sporting Kansas City, and no disrespect to any other supporters group, but I truly feel like that bar has been set. It's taken what Barra Brava was in DC, back in the late 90s and kind of, put a magnifying glass in, put a firecracker underneath it and just exploded it and turned it into a whole different realm.
Yeah, and the reason I look at Kansas City over Portland or Seattle is because of the rebrand. And for a guy who supports a team that the team that is kind of in the doldrums right now, which is DC United, I look at Kansas City and I go, okay, this isn't an expansion team. This is a team that just basically said, you know what, everything's wiped away. We're starting from scratch, and they built this from something that was already there that wasn't awful, but it wasn't great either. And I think that's something that should hearten every other team in the league outside of your big supporters areas like Seattle and Portland.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, it's probably their third rebrand, if we're being honest. I mean, it was a Kansas City Wiz.
Yeah.
Then it was a Kansas City Wizards. You go from Arrowhead to a Division III AAA baseball field, and now you have Sporting Park. It's I think it shows the importance of local ownership. It shows the importance of pride within the city to have successful sports teams. And what I always say is, I think you go back to those days of DC United and how incredible. I mean, I remember being on the field at RFK and smelling the grass and feeling the humidity in the air and looking around and watching the stands bounce and looking across the field and seeing those classic all-black kits with the big white stripes across their chest. It was intimidating. I mean, it was incredibly intimidating. That not to name, you start naming the players historically, that gets even more frightening. But I think that's what the idea is, and that's the standard that's set for every MLS club and every MLS supporters group, and it's unique in each individual market. But I think it's up to it's up to ownership, it's up to the presidents, it's up to marketing, the general managers, how to harness that, especially given that social media is so strong now, and it brings together so many different cultures and types of people. And that's the one thing I do respect Timbers Army. I think Timbers Army is incredible. And then Seattle, what they've done, there's a brand that I think the common fan has latched onto, an idea, and that's not easy to create. I think that's very difficult to create.
Give me one or two matchups that you will be kind of keeping your eye on as the match unfolds.
I think first and foremost, the health of Alvaro Saborio and Chris Wingert. I think, with Chris Wingert, collapsed lung, dislocated ribs, and on that tackle on Diego Valeri in the first leg, Alvaro Saborio pulling up lame with the adductor injury in that first leg, and RSL having to finish with 10 men against the LA Galaxy. If they are healthy enough to go, my question is, are they healthy enough to go 120 minutes? Because I don't see a lot of goals being scored in this game. And if you get pushed into overtime, you got to make sure you got guys that are healthy enough. I think for me, the X factor for Sporting Kansas City has always been Aurelian Collin. I think he's one of the most athletically gifted defenders in the league, yet he takes an unbelievable amount of risks over the course of 90 minutes. His tackles, his aerial ability. I think with the ball at his feet, there's so many times where I sit there and I'm watching him and saying, whoa, I would never, as a former center back, ever put myself in that situation. But then again, I was a complete donkey, and there's no way I could recover the way he could. And then also, I think the front three for Sporting Kansas City, that's my next one. Who plays? I mean, you sell Kai Kamara to Middlesbrough, so you lose a starter and you lose the first substitute on the bench that has to fill his role. We've seen Teal Bunbury and Dom Dwyer, switch at that point striker. We've seen Bieler come off the bench, and he's their big DP who's got double digits in goals. Benny Feilhaber playing so well. Graham Zusi pushes out to the right, but Sooney Saad, Jacob Peterson, and CJ Sapong have all come in and started at certain points. None of those guys, I think, would scare RSL defensively, but I think none of those guys scared Houston Dynamo defensively either. So Sporting Kansas City is a very, very good team. I like the way they play. They got bite. I like Yuri Rosell. I like Paulo Nagamura. I like how they boss around the midfield. Graham Busey can do things very few players can do in Major League Soccer. But for us, I like with Beckerman, Luis Gil, Ned Gravovoy, Javi Morales, that diamond formation, I just think it's dirty. I love it. I think they're so good in what they do, and they're so confident. They played so many games together. I just, there's a lot of individual matchups, and I think outside that first 15 minutes of Demolition Derby, it could really come down to just one mistake, and ultimately which team can punish that one mistake.
Devin Sandoval's, I don't want to say emergence, but the way that he played against Portland, does that make it maybe a little easier for Jason Christ to go, okay, maybe I'll run Sandoval out for 60 minutes, and then I have my ace in the hole with Saborio if I need him, and we get down to that time.
The six-fingered man, Inigo Montoya, a.k.a. Devin Sandoval. He's been nothing short of fantastic this year. With Fabian Espinola going to New York, they bring back Robbie Finley. They bring in Joao Plata from Toronto. They find Olmes Garcia in Colombia, and somehow they get a second-round pick in Devin Sandoval, who no one had tabs on. Sandoval brings a very similar stature to Sabo, but he's different. Sabo's a goal scorer. Sabo is point striker, size, strength, stays centrally, where Devin Sandoval can mimic that style, but yet when he gets the ball off his chest or off his feet, he spins, and he usually spins into the outside shoulder of a center back and the inside shoulder of an outside back. So he kind of spins wide, where Sabo kind of stays central. When Sandoval's on the field and he does spin wide, that's where Javier Morales looks to vacate and go into that space where Sandoval just kind of pushed out. And so it brings a little bit of a different dynamic. And I think Devin Sandoval has proved without a shadow of a doubt that he's ready to play at this level. And I can only imagine once this season's over how many phone calls he's going to get from teams around the league trying to see if they can pry Sandoval away from Real Salt Lake.
I'm not going to ask you for your prediction because you're in a no-win situation. If you choose Sporting Kansas City, you still got to go back to Salt Lake and live there. And if you choose Salt Lake, everyone's going to call you a homer, Brian.
I think I'm so used to be called a homer at this point. It doesn't really matter. I see this. I really do see it going goalless for a while. Again, I think this game could come down to the difference, one rash challenge, one guy who goes in a little too hard. What I said earlier today on our show is I think that there's going to be one guy who's so amped up over this game, knowing that's on national television, knowing it's a final, knowing it's in Kansas City with that type of fan base, that there's going to be someone that goes in for an early yellow card. And I think Hilario Grajeda, who was named the MLS Referee of the Year, who's going to be in charge. I think he's going to try to get a hold of this game early. I don't think he's going to allow these two teams that have a physical history with each other to get out of control. And I think whoever gets that early yellow card, especially if it's a midfield player, if it's a guy like Beckerman, if it's a guy like Yuri Rosell, if it's a guy like Nagamura, that could really change. Even a guy like Chris Schuler or potentially Aurelian Collin. If any of those guys go in the book, that could really change everything in that second half. Knowing there could be that one play where the ball kind of skips away, or the one play where it's a heavy touch, or kind of that touch tackle scenario, where you see the referee go to the back pocket and go to the red.
See, I think I'm glad you finally mentioned his name because the description of the person or the scenario just screamed Colin, and then you didn't mention him, and then you mentioned other guys, and then you finally mentioned Colin. I think he's the guy that will look at the surroundings and make that challenge. And, he's walked a tightrope all season where he's kind of avoided a lot more red cards than he probably should have got. And if this is a situation where if a guy's going to go and do something, get a rush of blood to the head, if you will, he's the guy that I'm always looking at.
Yeah, I would say there's always been two guys. Well, in the last 2 years, there's been two guys in this league that I've always said that as a general manager, as a head coach, he would make me cringe, and that would be Victor Bernardez in San Jose, who I think is kind of a poor man's Jamison Olave, and then Aurelian Collin, just because Collin possesses so much athleticism. He's got size, he's got aerial strength, he's hard in the tackle. Positionally, he recovers very well, but he plays, in my opinion, he plays very, very dangerously over 90 minutes. And I couldn't agree with you more. I look at this game, and every time I watch him play, I'm prepared to explain why he got the red card or why he got the second yellow. And I think it's just because I'm enamored with the way he plays. I like the way he plays. I like how much emotion that he plays with. But at the same time, I just feel like he's a guy that, thankfully, he's got a guy like Matt Beasler next to him who's calm, he's fluid, very cerebral in his positioning, doesn't go to tackle, doesn't go to pick up the yellow card too often. He's the exact polar opposite of Aurelian Collin. I think that's what makes Sporting Kansas City so good.
He's the guy that is just as likely to get sent off as he is to head home a winner in the 119th minutes. Dunny, enjoy it, my friend, and thank you very much for taking some time to talk with us.
No, absolutely. I always appreciate it, my man.
Pitch Pass.
This is your voice. This is my red, white, and blue. This is my anthem to you.
For more show information, go to pitchpass.com.